All right, welcome everyone to our Hilltop Outreach Institute Winter Series workshop. This is our last workshop of 2023, and this was a bonus workshop. This was not in our original series, and the amazing Finn Menzies, who we are proud to call a Hilltop parent, graciously volunteered to hold this workshop for our community. So we are so grateful for you, Finn, for putting in your time and energy, sharing your wisdom and gifts with us tonight. And we're also so grateful for all of you who showed up. We had over 56 people register for this workshop, which is one of our highest registered workshops in the last 2 years. So woohoo, we're so glad you're here. My name is Becky. For those of you who don't already know me, I am the faculty life coach and outreach coordinator at Hilltop. And I have a few housekeeping reminders for you all before we jump into our content tonight. So if you don't already, please make sure that your mute button is on, just so we don't have any competing audio. Please use the chat feature to share supportive and respectful reflections and questions that will help support a learning community. If you are able to have your video on, that just really helps us connect a bit more across the screen. And there will be at least one breakout session this evening. If you can participate, we would really appreciate that. We also realize some of you may be commuting or have other things going on. You can just let us know that in the chat if you're just actively listening. And I'd love to introduce you all officially to Finn Menzies, our presenter this evening. Finn is a trans father, family coach, and writer. He brings over 15 years of experience as an early educator and helps guide families to build stronger relationships through practices of reciprocity. Finn works closely with LGBTQIA families, assisting caregivers and advocating for their children. And when not working with other families, Finn is playing with his awesome toddler, putzing around his garden, or hosting his workshop called Undoing Ego on writing and embodiment. And towards the end of tonight's presentation, I will be sure to drop 2 links in the chat of ways that you can stay in touch with Finn after this workshop. So before I hand things off to Finn and before we dive in, I'd like us to all take a collective moment together to participate in a tradition here at Hilltop, a practice that we hold before every workshop, which is to acknowledge the land that we are on. So if you just take a moment to come into presence, whether you're at home or out in the world or commuting, and just taking a deep breath. And acknowledging that wherever you are joining us from today, we have folks in Washington, Oregon, California, Illinois. We ask that you pause to really acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that each of us is sitting on stolen Indigenous lands. So where I work and reside in Seattle, Washington, we are occupying the traditional land of the Duwamish in the city named for their chief, who was the first signer of the Treaty of Point Elliott, as well as the land of the Suquamish, the Muckleshoot, and the Snoqualmie tribes of what is known today as King County, past and present. We also occupy the lands that touch the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Puyallup and Tulalip nations. And we honor with gratitude the land itself and all that these tribes do as stewards of this land. It's important to recognize the many impacts of historical colonization that continue to have ripple effects in our lives and in our world today. The current global conflicts, acts of war and genocide, oppressive systems and policies that continue to marginalize and harm people based on their identities are all symptoms of our unhealed societal traumas and of our disconnection from the land and from our common humanity. And while these challenges and dangers can be overwhelming for us at times, each of us has the opportunity to foster deeper healing for ourselves and each other, to work towards restorative justice for our Indigenous brothers, sisters, and Two Spirits, and for all who are most marginalized in our society. We can do this from a place of radical love and truth telling, not only for ourselves, but also for those who we may perceive as different from us in some way. And we do this by banding together as a community so that we can find joy and empowerment in our social justice work and overcome fear that may be limiting us from living and acting from our deepest values. So to close, I would love to support you all to take action towards Indigenous restorative justice and decolonization as a community. And I'm posting a few links in the chat for you to do this. And if anyone in the audience has other helpful resources or links that they would like to share, I encourage you to please share those in the chat as well. And I thank you for participating in that land acknowledgement as I pass things over to Finn. Welcome, Finn.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I've given many workshops around the nation on this topic, and I have never heard a more heartfelt land acknowledgement. So thanks for prepping my body and mind to be here. Okay, so Becky is going to be my Vanna White, and instead of me repeating myself, I'm going to have a signal. So like when I do my nervous high thing, that means change the slide, okay?
And Finn, I'm just turning on closed captions now that I've transitioned here, and I'm just about to share your slideshow.
Great. While we're waiting for it to warm up, I'm really thinking about light. I mean, tonight was the first time that I lit our Hanukkah with my toddler. And so I'm wondering what your relationship to light is as we're getting close to winter solstice. You can write it in the chat. How are you feeling it in your body? How are you experiencing it in the world? Yeah, or more like a metaphorical, metaphysical level. How are you finding hope? Yeah, that's very concrete. Me too. I'm missing light. Okay, here we are. Gender inclusive practices in the early years for Hilltops Children's Center and everyone who joins us. I'm Finn. Boop, boop. There I am. So you heard about what I do and how I have a toddler. Her name is Jude. She'll be present here today, not on screen, but in what I'm talking about. So I wanted to start by, I always start by naming some of my intersecting identities so that you know that we're not just only grounding in the land that we're in, but you also can feel or see better my cultural locale and also to privilege. So my name is Finn. My pronouns are he, him. And some of my identities are that I'm a white trans man, and I have Jewish descent, but I have a Buddhist philosophy. I come from a background of middle class financial stability. I'm a double Aries and an Enneagram 4. So big feelings come very naturally to me. I hope that I also get to know you a little bit more as we spend these 2 hours together. Okay, we just did like a beautiful centering with the land acknowledgement, but I'm going to ask us to do another centering practice on the next slide. So this practice that I'm going to lead us in is from my teacher, Prentice Hemphill, through the Embodiment Institute. So I just wanted to say that up front. This is not a practice from me. This is one that I'm also learning. And I always start with a centering practice because we are living inside a culture with a long history of misogyny, queerphobia, and transphobia. So when we talk about gender, it's very natural for our nervous systems to light up and for strong emotions to be coming up as well. So I like to center our mind and body before we start talking about it. I highly recommend that you look into the Embodiment Institute. It's been really life-changing for me. So what we're going to do is we're going to feel through 6 dimensions of our body. So from down up, and then from side to side in our width, and then from our back to our front. And if closing your eyes helps you to stay present, please do that. If that doesn't help you feel present, don't. So first, we're going to start with the line up and down. Let's pay attention to your feet and like just send some mental energy down there. Like imagine that they're lighting up. Maybe you want to press on the floor. And then if you can, with your third eye, with your imagination, with your mind's eye, imagine with that energy that you're growing roots through all the foundation of where you are into the soil. And this direction, this dimension is about belonging and dignity. So you are not separate from Earth. We are of the biosphere. We are of Earth. And so through the feet, I want you to receive that sense of belonging from our biome. And then once you feel that the earth has you, it's really holding you, then you can start moving that breath and attention up the spine. And what I do is I imagine that my crown of my head is like a little camera aperture. So you belong to the earth, and also you belong to the greater cosmos and whatever you believe to be the spirit bigger than you. And so when I open that aperture, I'm also receiving support and wisdom from that source, from the greater source. So you've got earth below you and source above you. And then, so now we're tethered, right? We're going to feel through the width of our body. So I try first by breathing through the ribs, like really stretching out the rib cage from side to side to sort of feel the space I take up physically. And then also like my field of energy, like what space do I take up with my feelings, my vibration? And this is the dimension of connection. So maybe you want to imagine all the people in community with you, the people who take care of you and who you take care of. This is also the dimension where we feel our authentic boundary, right? Like where that field touches other fields and how to do so in a loving way. So feel that, feel how much space you take up. And then put that attention towards your back body. So like the back of the heart, back of the lungs. Maybe you can feel the chair beneath you or behind you. And here, I want you to imagine your ancestors, your lineage, and the people in your life in present day that really have your back. And what I imagine is how many people had to love me into being since the beginning of time. So there's a long line of people who loved you. Imagine them all standing behind you. And then with that, right, knowing that they have you, I want you to start moving through your body towards the front. So, can you feel your belly button from the inside? Those organs inside of you. And then when you get closer to the front, can you feel where your nose touches the air? But don't go too fast, you know? We offer our front side, this part of our dimension, so much to the world. So quickly we're in, in front of ourselves. So really move from the back towards the front. And then once you're there, slowly, I want you to think about the future. And from this centered place, what offering are you going to give to the future? Hey, here we are. Here we are together. When you're ready, you can shake it out or, come back to planet Earth. Sometimes I feel like I have to do that. Try to do this practice. And then we're going to change. We're going to boop, boop. We'll look at our learning goals for the next hour and a half. And they're really simple. We're going to gain insights to better understand queer and trans people. We're going to introduce what the research says on gender development. And then we're going to get some concrete tools on how to practice inclusion or parent with the lens of inclusion. And I also want to say, like, I do want to be concise in these slides because I want to give ample time for Q&A. So if you feel like I'm going a little fast, it's because I want you to be able to talk to me at the end. Okay, let's calibrate. Yep. So we're all here today, and we're coming in with different degrees of familiarity with queer and trans life experiences. And that's a good thing because we're here to learn from each other. And also, I want to make sure that all of us leave here with a foundational understanding of gender identity and some of the experiences that trans and non-binary people go through so that we can deepen those learning conversations. So the next like half an hour and some, we're just going to spend time on building a shared language so that we can have those conversations. And just like Becky said, like if you would like to add something, please do, because this is a workshop, it's interactive. Type it in the chat, okay? And also, if you're nervous to do that, know that you'll have time and you'll get brave over the next 2 hours and you can ask me a Q&A. So then on the next slide, I'm going to ask a big question. Are you ready? What is gender? And I want you, like, we always have the thing where like something pops up immediately. It's not even, we're not even in control of it. Will you just like let that first thing that came into your mind be there for a minute? Just let it be there for a second. And let it be in the background, like let it wash over you while I'm talking. So the thing about gender is that it's continuously evolving how we understand it. What I can tell you about it is that there are more and more studies showing that younger generations understand gender as on a spectrum, that it's expansive rather than a static binary, like only man, woman, boy, and girl. And more young people are vocally, so it's not saying that there's more trans people, but more people are vocally identifying as trans and non-binary. So in the US, 1 in 20 Americans under 30 identify as trans and or non-binary. But like, what does that mean? What is gender, right? So I'm going to sort of give you the pieces, and then I'm going to tell you what I know for sure. So gender begins with the assignment of our sex based on our anatomy of birth. But the thing I want you to really hear is that gender and sex are not the same thing. In our culture, gender is presumed based on sex. And for a lot of us, like that assumption never gets called into question because we're cisgender. But what I want to like really point out at is like when a baby is born, and I know this because my wife is a medical resident. She doesn't do this, but other people do. When a baby is born, the doctor calls out right? Like they don't say, congratulations, your baby has a vagina, right? What do they say? They say, congratulations, you have this sweet baby girl. So what I am claiming is that sex and gender are both assigned simultaneously at birth or sometimes before birth. So there's the gender assignment, and then there's the gender feeling of what we feel. So gender is not the same as our anatomy. It's actually a complex interrelationship between three things. You ready to change it, Becky? Go for it. So gender is not just this static thing. It's actually our body, our identity, and social gender. I'll try to make that as concrete as possible. So, of course, it's our bodies and like how we feel in our bodies. And then it's also this internal knowing of ourself. And then it's also how people interpret that knowing and how people interpret our expression and interpret our bodies. And actually, all of this sort of shape us into what gender is. So what I like to say is that gender really shows up as a gender experience. We all have a gender experience. It's not just trans and non-binary people. If you're feeling like, I don't know if I have a gender experience, it's very possible that you haven't yet had metacognition around that experience yet, because cis people don't have to be aware of their gender experience in the same way that trans and non-binary people have to be. But you have one, and I'm going to tell you about the pieces of this experience. So one of them is gender affirmations. Gender affirmations are experiences that support, value, or honor someone's gender. So examples of these are somebody assumes or honors your pronouns, that you have mirrors of your gender experience and widely in the media, that you have access to gender affirming care, etc. Those are gender affirmations. And another part is my favorite part of the gender experience is being able to experience gender euphoria. And this is the deep satisfaction, calm, or joy that happens inside a person when there's congruence between their gender identity and the way that their gender is embodied, expressed, or perceived. Now, the reason why it's my favorite is because I didn't have it for a long time. And then when I got there, it was magic. So again, gender euphoria is not just for trans and non-binary people, it's for everybody, but we're more acutely aware of it because we have less access to it. After I sort of understood what it meant to experience gender euphoria, I actually had all of these like vivid memories of my mom, who's a cis woman, experiencing gender euphoria. So I know that it's possible for everybody. Now, on the flip side of affirmation and euphoria is dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is an intense and persistent discomfort with one's sex and gender assigned at birth. This can include body dysphoria, social dysphoria, or both. And the critical element of gender dysphoria is that it's significant clinical distress. Yeah, we can talk more about that in Q&A. So personally for me, it was this experience of gender dysphoria that led to my own medical transition, and transitioning alleviated this persistent discomfort and gave me back my life. So I want you to know that gender dysphoria isn't the only reason why people transition, but I want you to know that transition is one way that people can alleviate gender dysphoria. So you're still trans, even if you don't have gender dysphoria, if you're trans. Just saying. Just want to make clear about that. Okay. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I just said a lot of words. I said a lot of things. And the main point that I want you to take away with is that gender is a unique internal felt sense. And it's not necessarily visible to others. It's not your anatomy. It's not your expression. It's not on the outside for other people to consume. Gender identity is not visible to others. You can't see someone's gender identity. It's an internal sense of knowing and being. That's what I want you to take away. So let's talk about some of those gender identities and the names we have for them. I'm sure you've heard of these terms. Maybe you're quite familiar with them. Maybe you're familiar with them, but you're not sure how they work together. Or maybe they're new to you, and that's okay. All fluency in this vocabulary is warmly welcomed because it creates safer places for people like me and our kids. Okay, so let's just talk about the differences between trans and non-binary and how they work together. Transgender and non-binary can actually mean a lot of different things because they're both umbrella terms, meaning that there are many identities within trans and non-binary umbrellas. But at the core, a transgender person or a trans person is somebody whose gender identity is different from the gender and sex that they were assigned at birth. A non-binary person is someone whose gender identity is not exclusively male or female, but rather both, neither, or an expansion of. And a cisgender person or a cis person is somebody where the doctor got it right, where your gender identity is in congruence with the sex that you were assigned at birth. And I want to say that I intentionally included cisgender on this page for our vocabulary because I want to decentralize cisgender as being the norm. It's one gender experience among many. And also I want to call into that there's power at play right here. Because if you're a cisgendered person, you have more access to gender affirmation, which means that you have more privilege. So now that I've laid out all the terms for you, I want to take some time to reflect on our gender identity, all of the many that they are. Let's turn. Okay, so this is the gender unicorn. It's a visual that helps us see the different spectrums and continuums of experiences with gender and sexuality. Now, I use this pretty much in every workshop I do, and it's totally fraught. Just want to say, it's not perfect. For example, you'll see on gender identity and gender expression, I think on all of them, yeah. On every single continuum, it has the word other. I would not do that. I would have words I would say expansive, because we're not other. There's not a difference. It's just not on those lines. So I'm going to show you how I would fill this out, and then you are going to fill it out. Okay, Becky, you're going to show my gender identity on the next one. Okay. So here I am. So you see 3 lines and you're probably thinking, I'm not all those things, but it's the way that you experience those things. So for me, because I'm a trans man, I don't feel female. So I put it like all the way over to the 0. Do you see that? And then if you look at man, I feel like a man. So I put it all the way the other side. And then this little plot that I did for other or expansive, I just wanted to honor the part of my story that I was socialized female, right? And so like, that's part of my gender experience. So I put it like a little bit farther from 0. And then my expression, that's how I'm presenting to the world. So this is the social gender part. I have a very binary expression. You know, I have a beard, short hair. So I put, again, my feminine is like almost at zero, my masculine is almost to the other end. And then again, for other, I was like, well, like a lot of people confuse me for a gay man because I just have the mannerisms of someone who's socialized female, you know? So I also had that then. And then I like these two things too, physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to. Um, I think this is getting in the realm of us being more comfortable with the way people are in a relationship and taking monogamy off the pedestal. So physically attracted to women, I'm physically attracted to men. Um, I'm physically attracted to everyone. And then emotionally attracted to, the way that I plotted that is that who I have intimacy with, like who I have deep connection with. And so I tend to have heart deep connection with women and not so much with men, probably because of patriarchy, and then also with people of other genders. So, oh, and I'll add one more thing. So, you know how I said you can't see someone's gender identity, right? You also can't presume someone's pronouns. So I added them there. It just happens that I present in a binary way and my pronouns are he, him, but that is not true for everyone. So that's what I wanted you to know that. Okay, so let's just take like 5-ish minutes to think about where you're at on these continuums. I invite you to mute me if you're not somebody who can do two things at one time. But I'm going to talk while you're filling it out, okay? The reason why I start with us is that we cannot hold space for our children exploring their genders unless we understand our own. We have to be comfortable in articulating, at least to ourselves, our gender experience if we are going to be people who hold space for kids who are developing. So that's all I wanted to say while you're thinking about it. How do we feel? Are we ready to reflect with each other? Okay. Before you go into breakout rooms, Becky's going to put you in breakout rooms. I want to tell you, I'm going to give you permission if you haven't given permission to yourself. You don't have to share your answers on the gender unicorn. That is not what the reflection is going to be about. Because again, like that's your personal sense of who you are. And if that you don't feel comfortable sharing that, you don't have to do that. What I do encourage you to reflect with in community is these two questions. Are you ready, Becky? Yeah. I'll tell you them because I have them up too. Has anything surprised you? And then what emotion or sensation comes up when you try to articulate your gender experience?
Oh, sorry.
Just looking at the comments, I wanted to say, oh, Jenny, I want to say thank you to you because I want to note from your comment that gender identity and gender expression are related, right? Because you have agency over how you express that felt sense of your that you feel, right? It is not related. Your gender is not related who you are attracted to, right? So any person of any gender can be attracted to, whether physically or emotionally, to any other gender. I just wanted to make that clear. So the top half and the bottom half are not related. Does that make sense? Okay. Um, and then does anyone want to be brave enough to share, like in the big group, what you talked about in your breakout rooms?
Hi, Paul.
Okay.
Well, I was with I think Angela, but I think one of your questions was, let's see, what was the second question? Anything su- not surprise you? What was the second question? I'm sorry.
What emotion or sensation came up
Came up.
for you while you try to
Okay.
articulate your
One
gender?
of the yeah, one of the things that I teach college and I teach a diversity, equity, and inclusion course, and we talk about specific marginalized identities. And I always talk to my students about their culture and things like that. And my white students typically say, um, I don't have a culture. What do you mean? Like, what are you talking about? And I'm always like, you have a culture. You have an identity structure that, sorry, all of a sudden, dogs. And for the first time when we were talking about gender identity, I was like, oh, this is what my white students feel because I've never had to really give it any thought about, I'm a cisgendered, would be typical development, fully affirmed. And this is how my white students feel when they're trying to talk about their experiences. And so it really made me think about privilege a lot and, different ways that that shows up.
A beautifully articulated hallelujah. Um, I have used the analogy. Probably there's a lot of younger people here that don't take PT because they don't have older bodies like mine. But if you've done physical therapy, it's like that, right? Like when the physical therapist is saying, "Can you isolate that muscle?" and your brain has like doesn't even know how to talk to that muscle, you know? It can feel like that because you haven't had to, And I was just telling Becky that it's easier to fill out the bottom half of this because there's more language and exposure to around who we are attracted to rather than orienting towards ourselves. We don't have a lot of conversations around that. So yeah, it is a little bit like you're in no man's land. The one thing I want to say, if you ever come back to the gender unicorn or practice like this, is one thing that trans and non-binary people have to do is they have to really lean into radical permission because they don't get permission from mass culture. So I want to give you all permission to play and to say, yeah, that's true for me. Okay, so let's talk about kids. Let's do the second part. Gender in the early years. I'm going to show you a timeline in the next slide. We're just going to go to the next slide, okay, Becky? Of how gender develops from birth until 5. So it starts from the very beginning. And you could say that it starts before the beginning, because if you're somebody who finds out the sex of your baby and you're making plans about your baby, you're creating an environment for that baby. So babies start to learn from the time they're born what it means to be a boy or a girl. And then within the first year of their life, they start to form a foundational understanding of gender, both in themselves and how it works in their world. I think a way that I can explain this is like, just imagine a baby and think about all the clothes we put them in, the colors that we surround them with, the toys they're handed, and in particular, the way we interact with babies, how we speak to them, how we hold them, etc. Then by a year, by 12 months, they start to begin to categorize other people by gender. And really shortly after that, by 1.5, they begin to start being aware of their own gender identity. And it's really in this process of categorization, right? Like, if you come from a family that presents like mine, right? My child is like, I have a daddy, he uses he, him. I have a mommy, she uses she, her. Who am I? Sid, you're off mute.
Oh, so sorry.
I know them, so that's okay. By 2 years old is when they start using culturally defined gender labels. So exactly what I was just saying, like they're saying mommy and saying she for mommy, daddy, sister, they're using gendered language by 2 years old. They're maybe not always doing it right or correctly as we think so, but they're starting to use it. They're also digesting a lot around gender stereotypes. And it's through that, actually, through that metabolizing of gender stereotypes, that they can begin awareness of if their gender is compatible or incompatible with what they were assigned at birth. So the thing that's tricky about this, right, is that alongside of their gender development is also their language development. So we can't really know how early children know themselves because they can't tell us yet. What we do know is that around 3, most toddlers have established their gender identity. And then by age 4, they've developed and internalized gender stereotypes informed by cultural messaging. So it's around that pre-K age that you're going to hear a lot like, pink is for girls. The reason why I put this timeline here is that I would like to, I don't want to shame, that's not the thing, but I would like to gently help unlearn the skepticism around toddlers knowing who they are. And this is the timeline of their development. It's not the timeline of how we respond to their development. So if you want questions about like, well, what's my job? How do I support this? Then let's do that in the Q&A, okay? The next slide, well, in 2 slides, yeah, there you go. Let's do that one. So I told you that the main thing I want you to know, right, is I want you to know what gender identity is, and then I want you to know how gender develops. But I think one of the most important things that I hope besides that you take from tonight is really dear to my heart as an early educator myself. Did I say that? Before I was a family coach, I taught in early ed for 15 years. So I've been in preschool and kindergarten classrooms for a long time. And so for that short legacy that I left, I want you to think of this, okay? Talking about gender is not talking about sexuality or about having sex. It's not the same thing. Talking about gender is talking about identity in the same way that you would talk about racial identity, religious identity, cultural identity. It should be celebratory, it should be affirming, and it should be developmentally appropriate. Okay, so now I'm going to give you an example of what that can look like. We're going to watch a video. Can you guys hear? Can you all hear? No.
Nope.
Okay. Did you see that I just got myself in gendered language? Can you all hear? Becky, do you know how to share your sound? Okay.
This doll, or you can play with this ball. And the boy chooses the ball. My theory is because early humans, like the men, as far as I'm concerned, hunted.
I mean, is there a reason why the men were the ones hunting?
Probably because they were stronger.
Hi, I'm Nanta.
Hi, I'm Willow.
Willow, nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Brianna.
Hey, Brianna, I'm Nanta. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Okay, so can I start asking questions? Mom, you said think of some questions and be prepared. I'm prepared.
Do you know why we're here today?
Not really.
Not really. Okay.
I think it has something to do like gender non-binary.
Or non-conforming.
Yeah, both. Yeah, so gender non-conforming and non-binary.
What's gender non-conforming?
Well, what do you think it is?
Something
Make a
about
guess.
gender, because I hear the word gender in it.
Do I look like a girl to you?
Yes.
Well, what if I told you that sometimes, though, I feel more like a boy?
That's okay.
So binary, boy and a girl. So non-binary, meaning
The opposite.
Yeah, exactly. That's a bunch of crock, right? You can be one end, the other end, or anywhere in between.
That's interesting. But confusing.
So let's really start getting into some questions. Do you wish you were raised not as a girl but just an Anta?
Yes, totally. It would have been great to just be marked like X gender, not boy, not girl. Coming into my own skin later in life would have been a lot more easier. Did you always know you're a girl?
Yeah.
Okay. Has that ever changed or for you or?
No.
No. How did you know you were a girl?
I feel it in my body.
Yeah.
I'm a boy, not a girl.
But people think he's a girl.
Oh, so people think you're a girl.
I've been called a girl, I think 309 times now. And I like my hair just how it is.
What makes a boy a boy?
An X and a Y chromosome.
Oh, so like, is there anything to name, like on the outside of somebody that makes them a boy?
Like,
Genitalia.
what?
Yeah.
No, that's also genetics, but like,
Well, yeah, but like that's on the outside. I'm just saying.
are we talking about like
Looking or
Emotions.
like emotional or like hormonal or like genetical?
or, like
Genetics.
feelings? Like,
Genetical.
I don't know where we're going. Like,
Yeah, I don't either.
Have you ever heard about like how people try to say like pink is a girl thing, and then like how blue is like a boy color?
Yeah, I hear about that, even though blue is one of my favorite colors.
Yeah, right. So you see how confusing that could feel like when it's
Yeah.
like, I want to do this and that.
if a parent offers the option with no bias, hey, you can play with this doll or he can play with his ball. And the boy chooses the ball. My theory is because early humans, like the men, as far as I'm concerned, hunted. And so it's sort of like genetically men preferred things that moved around. I don't know, that's like completely a theory in terms of.
I mean, is there a reason why the men were the ones hunting?
Probably because they were stronger.
And I think that's where I kind of like, oh, really? Well, I'm strong. Why can't I be a hunter too?
Well, yeah, but like in terms of like muscle mass, men have like, and I mean, they probably weren't thinking about that.
Does your family ever get mad at you for what you want to identify?
Oh yeah. I think it's different now that I'm an adult. But growing up, my mom would force me to wear a dress that I don't really want to wear.
I don't really like wearing dresses or skirts too, so I feel really uncomfortable when I'm like wearing the skirt.
Yeah. But did you get to choose your outfit today?
No.
So you know exactly how I feel then.
Yeah.
Oh.
How do you know if somebody's gender nonconforming? Is it okay to ask somebody what their gender is?
So it's a lot better to ask about the person's pronouns.
That would be like he or she or they.
Right. Versus if I said,
What's your gender?
yeah, what's your gender? Are you a boy or are you a girl?
Seems like you're very interested in knowing.
So have you ever been confused by using they, them as a pronoun for someone?
I mean, sometimes it can be confusing, but I also have to remember that that's the pronouns that they've chosen, and I need to respect that. I've noticed someone in my class, first period, has the pronouns that they would like on their backpack.
Oh, really? Oh, that's cool. I've been to the Philippines.
Oh, I like the Philippines.
Oh, you've been there too?
Yeah.
That's where my family's from. And
Where my mom's from.
okay, they use the term siya. So siya is like all-encompassing of every gender, you know?
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's a girl who works at my tutoring center, and she goes by they, them, and then a lot of times, I just didn't call her she, and then I'm like, oh wait, no, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Does she ever, or sorry, see, even I made that mistake. Do they ever address it with, or correct people who may use a different pronoun for them?
No, but somebody else might.
How does being non-binary affect your day-to-day life?
Looking for a job, there's times where, before going into an interview, I totally just want to wear, these slacks and, a button-up shirt, but will it be more likely to get the job if I wore, a dress suit or something, you know?
Why is gender such a big deal?
You know, sometimes I wish it really wasn't. How do you feel about, is it a big deal to you?
No, I just figure, why can't they just be a person,
Yeah. Do you all think gender's a big deal?
No. Well, I mean, if someone was identified as neither boy nor girl, it's not a big deal to me if they were in between, but gender is a big part of who you are.
Oh, that's real, yeah. Thanks. Do you like handshakes?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. And boop.
Okay. It feels like we just were reflecting, but I'm going to ask you some more reflection questions. Okay, so I love that video. What strikes you about the questions that were asked, and the words that the kids used, or how these interviews went? And what feelings come up for you when you think about talking to kids about gender? Do you feel excited, serious, nervous, etc.? And I think we're going to go back in our breakout rooms, right? To do these, yeah.
Yeah, I'll send everyone off to their rooms. And then Finn, what do you think about after this breakout session, we all take a 5-minute break?
That sounds great.
Okay, great.
You know what I didn't say in my introduction? is how grateful I am that you are here, that you have one of the most emotionally taxing vocations that is healing the world, and it's 8:24, and I admire you all for being here. Thank you. Yeah. Does anybody want to share about that conversation? What came up for them? What came up in your conversation? You can just unmute. I feel safe here. I hope you do too.
In our group, we talked about how gender is not actually a really hard conversation with kids, but it's harder to have with the parents.
Mm,
And like when all information is new to you, like a child, like it's so easy for them to accept that, like, oh, well, actually, some things are like this. And these things aren't gendered, like pink is for anyone who wants pink. But then, like, counteracting the parents who might be like, well, why is my son in a dress? Well, actually, it's okay because it's just a piece of clothing, and like that's the harder end of it.
isn't that so the truth? Okay, I want to offer you something in that way. I'm going to talk to Becky about that because I do have some things that I could send out around addressing conflict with grown-ups around this topic, but it's not in tonight. So I'll have to figure out how to get that to you all. Okay. Because yeah, I feel you. Okay. Let's go to the next slide then.
Can I ask one question too? And perhaps
Sure.
it might be in what you send out later.
Yes.
Definitely the question about the boy wearing the dress is always the thing, and the thing that gets my students as well. But what about the conversation about the little boy says, well, gender is an X and a Y chromosome. Like I struggle, like I don't know what to say to that.
Yeah.
Could I add something? Because this is something that came up in my breakout group.
Great.
That question always drives me nuts, and I don't know if I have a great way to respond to it, but it is kind of conflating sex and gender. And also, like, I don't know that much about genetics, but I know that chromosomes can show up in a lot of different ways rather than just XX and XY. So really, like, new studies show that chromosomes aren't a great way of determining sex and certainly not gender. But I don't know if that's like a really great way to like respond to the question because it's kind of getting bogged down in the science of it. So I think I would just go back to saying like the body that you have is not the same as like your gender.
Right. I have to have that conversation because my body does not reflect what people expect to match my gender, right? And so like in my family, that comes up so intuitively because we have to have that conversation. I think what helps frame it for me, quite honestly, besides the fact that I live it, is that bodies are also not on a binary. There are many different ways that they show up in diversity. So we just say the word intersex, but there's many ways that people can be intersex. So just to dovetail what that was saying, yes, you will see people that have XX chromosomes and XY chromosomes, but that doesn't necessarily dictate the way that their hormonal systems work. And so they might actually look more female under a different scope, if you know what I'm saying, than they would if you just were looking at their chromosomes. So I want to approach it again with really creating a culture where we distinguish gender from anatomy. I think that's a great way to start, especially with younger kids or people beginning this conversation. So they say like, well, my daddy told me that boys have penises. You can say, yeah, people have penises, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their gender identity is that they're a boy. Okay. Yeah. Gender and early education. Let's talk about how we can grow people who don't have to do so much unlearning in their adulthood like us. Let's go to the next slide and talk about an asset lens. Okay. According to Dorothy M. Steele, identity affirming, she is somebody who works at Stanford in education. Identity affirming classrooms are those in which teachers strive to ensure that students that their social identities are an asset rather than a barrier to success. In such classrooms, students feel safe, included, and valued. So let's go to the next slide. I want you to think about what that classroom feels like when we do this. And what we are doing for our kids is we're helping them cultivate an asset lens. Now, I gotta tell you, I did this for for design purposes, but I don't actually believe in lists like this because we know that the classroom is an ecosystem. There's so many things happening at one time, right? So just take that with a grain of salt, okay? I did this so that it could be comprehensible in 2 hours. So cultivating an asset lens looks like inviting kids to share their identities and cultures all year round, sharing stories of celebration, making conversations about differences commonplace, and following the child's lead. So the more questions that the kids have, or the more curious they are, or the more that they already know about, you're letting them tell you what they're ready for. It doesn't look like requiring all kids to celebrate one identity at a time, telling stories of discrimination before telling stories of empowerment, talking about differences. This is a big one that I see, talking about differences in response to exclusive behaviors. And it doesn't look like avoidance or urgency. I think this might be my spiciest slide out of the whole thing tonight, and probably the one I'm going to get the most questions. So I just wanted to clarify something. The first one, under the sirens, it's not, I just want to say it's not harmful to have a group of kids make a paper pride flag all together or share a meal of a certain culture together. That's not a harmful thing to do. And also, we have the opportunity to cultivate a richer experience for young children if they get to insert themselves because their brains are already wired for that. And so what I'm trying to say here is that I have this dedication to trans liberation. And for me, what that is like radical re-envisioning of society, basically. That our society actually celebrates human diversity. So when we refrain from these isolated moments of affirming one piece of a person's identity or like segmenting identities, when we refrain from that practice, like everyone making a pride flag or everyone coloring a picture of Martin Luther King for Martin Luther King Day, when we don't do that, what we're doing is we are rejecting or we're not reinforcing the same system of who is marginalized and who is centered. So what I'm strongly suggesting is that our messaging being all of you is welcome here, all of your friend is welcome here all of the time. There's not a certain time where we welcome you. So that's what I'm trying to say. So the work for us, the work of the grown-ups, is that we need to be taking data. We need to be mindful about the identities that are not present or not mentioned. So all the kids are celebrating themselves and celebrating their friends, right? And for the folks who aren't in the room, that's our job to fill in with representation and education. Does anyone have any questions about this list? Or is there anything that you would add? Okay, that was easy. Let's talk about gender affirming language on the next slide. Okay. So I think one thing that comes up in a lot of my workshops is that people conflate inclusion and belonging with gender neutrality. And actually, building an asset lens with language is both neutral and specific language. And it's being aware of when to use them. I want to tell you a story about my toddler. So we always use the words baby or kid or toddler with my child as she was growing up, because we wanted her to insert herself, to organically feel like what words were affirming to her. And so since she could talk from like 1 and up until now, even at her pediatrician, they would say, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And she would say, "I'm a kid." And only in the past few weeks, actually, she's 3, has she said, "I'm a girl." One day during dinner, she just said, "I think I'm a girl." And we said, "Okay, great. Thanks for letting us know, And so we were playing, and I made a comment to her, and I said, "Oh my gosh, you're such a clever person." And she was pissed. She said, "I already told you I'm a girl." And I was like, okay, just like roll back for a second. I think it's important to note that girls are people first. And also, I'm hearing you saying that the word that's affirming to you is girl, and you would like me to use that word. So for her, affirming language is using gendered language, right? Because I know better. She told me. Before we know someone's words, before we know what's affirming, that's when we use gender neutral language. That's inclusive, because we're saying you have space to tell me who you are. The important part is that we're not assuming the binary. We're not assuming that gendered language is appropriate or accurate for every child or family. So I think speaking in groups, since we don't know, it's best to not place people in binary categories. And so on this slide, it just gives you some language that you can use in the classroom, right? Instead of boys and girls, we can use students. Instead of brothers and sisters, we can say siblings. Instead of mom and dad, we can use grown-ups, parents. Examples. I know somebody had a question about when it's not English. What I want to say is that language is a very important part of our identities. And so that is a family value that you have to decide how you want to approach that. But when thinking about Spanish, I know that there are feminine and masculine like nouns, like even inanimate nouns, I think what I would do if my family was Spanish speaking is that I would use gender neutral language. And then I would explain with my child why that there's feminine and masculine nouns in our language. And then I'm going to drop in the chat a really good cheat sheet for Spanish. I like this this blog. I think it does a good job. Okay, so this is the thing, I didn't talk about caregivers, but I'm going to talk about coworkers. So you're right. The stickiest part of our job around gender is usually not with the kids, it's with the grown-ups. And so on the next slide, I want to talk about what it's like when you catch yourself or you catch someone else not cultivating an asset lens. So really using gendered language is a habit, because that's the only thing that we've been using for most of our lives. That was what we were taught. So how can we help each other unlearn that habit? And so I just give some steps here. step one, like let's say you catch somebody really just, it happens also when we're tired, right? Just like anything, our habits come out when we're fatigued. So if you see that happening, someone using boys and girls, something like that, you just rephrase. That's such a good way to signal to students and to your coworker, like, oh, let's pay attention here. That's all, right? Let's pay attention to our language. Two, then you can talk to the grown-up privately. If you're the person being called in, say thank you. Always say thank you, even if you feel vulnerability, and vulnerability can come with that heat and even defensiveness. I'm asking us to build another habit of saying thank you. A really good practice is to build buddies or pods to practice with, especially if there's a person in your community that uses pronouns that you're not. Maybe they're using neo pronouns, ones that you've never even heard of before. Get a buddy, an accountability buddy to practice with, because I've noticed that if we don't say the words out loud, they don't really get internalized into our body. And then continue to unlearn and offer grace to people. You know, those grooves in our brains are real, and they're hard as we age to build new pathways, and so we have to give grace to each other. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say, unless someone else wanted to add something about calling someone in. Yeah, let's go to the next slide. So one of the biggest ways that we can celebrate gender expansive people in preschool is through storytelling, both orally and through reading books and songs. We know that, right? Like we already know. And luckily, we're living in an age where there are so many beautiful books that lift up people with all different bodies and genders. One of my favorite, I have two friends that I really trust in curating lists. One of them is genderandclassrooms.com. And then the other one is based in San Francisco. It's called Out and About Books. It's a little queer children's book bus. So those are both lists that I would look into. These are three of my favorites that I have in my house. And I just want to say, I think we probably already know this, but I want to say it out loud just in case. The pitfall is that we don't want to be only choosing books with narratives that are talking about gender expansive kids' identities, their gender identities. We want to have books that teach our kids that there is gender diversity, but we also want to humanize gender expansive kids by telling stories that are just about kids that happen to be gender expansive. So when you're choosing books, make sure that you get a mix of those. And I trust you all to have a critical eye around if it has a deficit lens, you know, like being trans is so sad. Let's not perpetuate that story. And you know what, Becky, because of time, because I want to give 15 minutes, I'm just gonna not do the next slide. I was gonna show you an example of how I use a wordless book to teach around like gender stereotypes, but I'm pretty sure that you're smart enough that you can do that.
I would recommend this book though. It's lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you do want a place to talk about gender stereotypes, I think wordless books are really great because it really punctuates that you can't know about someone's pronouns or about their gender identity unless they tell you. So if there's no words, right, we don't know. That's the whole point. So yeah, let's just take a minute, and then now I want to get off my slides and I want to see your faces and have you ask me questions or each other.
I have a student in my school.
Mhm.
Um, they're a student in my friend's class. Uh, a 3-year-old child who's just started like experimenting with his gender. So I was talking to my coworker about them the other day, and I was like, "Oh, what pronouns are we using for JMO right now?" Because I'd only ever known him as a boy, and then he started coming to school sometimes wearing dresses, sometimes with a ponytail. It sounds like his parents are very accepting of their gender exploration, and my co-teacher is also like very supportive of their gender exploration as well. I guess I just wonder, as like a member of the wider community, as a teacher at their school, how can I support a child this young with gender exploration without, especially since they're going back and forth on pronouns, they're going back and forth on gender expression. You ask them if they're, you go and say, "Hey, are you a girl or a boy?" And they will answer differently every single day. And so it's kind of like, what is the best way as a member of that community that I can support them in this exploration without kind of like leading them in any given direction? Like, how can I like help maintain it as like expansive and safe and teach them about things without sort of like assigning them any particular like gender or set of pronouns?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a question that I often get around this age group. I think because all of us have experienced gender specific harm, even white cis men, because white patriarchy is harmful. We are so wishing with our bodies to like be better allies, to do better, that we often put the cart in front of the horse, you know? So the universal language for this age, right, is play. Like they just want to play and they should be allowed to play. So instead of it turning into an interrogation, which it can really if we're asking a child questions when they're not developmentally ready to answer them. So I think the best practice that we can do is offer choice, right? So like having all options around dramatic play, like dress, be open, right? And then as a trans person myself, I what I wished I had as a young child was just more mirrors. So because the more mirrors we have, help us connect the dots around what resonates for us, what actually feels affirming. So I would be reading books about how kids know their pronouns instead of asking this specific child, like, what words do you want to use? I would be telling a story, or you can even just tell a story about a kid who who's on this journey of being like, yeah, that feels right for me, you know? And then I think the thing that to really work with is patience. Because when we are socialized in a binary world, we're also socialized for wanting concrete answers. And the younger generations are really, they understand, they live in a world of multiplicity. Their identities are multiple, and they can hold that within themselves. So we should allow for them to have that. So I would say just use the pronoun of the day, and continue the messaging of like, whatever you tell me is what's true for you, and I'm going to honor that.
I actually have a question. In our school, which I have multiple members of my team here, and we are, I would say, as the only person who exclusively goes by they them pronouns in the school, I find myself wanting to try to encourage all of the kids to explore that. But there are a lot of kids who don't really necessarily have an interest in exploring it. They're like, I have this assigned, thing that I am. And they kind of just go with that. And a lot of kids do like to explore it. I have a co-teacher who's in here in my room who did a dismissal activity for lunch, and they sang a song that was like, there's a silly clown in the ring, show us a silly dance. And then they got to go to lunch. And beforehand, they asked what pronoun they would like to use in the song. And so it was like a nice way to like, disseminate that pressure. But at the same time, there were a lot of kids who were like, I don't care, or they went with exactly what they were assigned with at birth. And so I find myself a lot of times trying not to like force that exploration on them, but at the same time, I don't know how to gently like say, you don't have to be what you are, you know what I mean? Or what people tell you you are. So I guess like, what are more gentle ways to introduce that? Because I have a lot of teachers in the school that say like, we don't necessarily correct them on my pronouns, but they use my correct pronouns, and then some of the kids catch on and go, hey, you're not saying she, or you're not saying him. Some of the kids think I'm a boy. And so, and I don't really correct them either. So I guess, do you have like certain tactics that you use to like show that there are options in the world, or is that come in like circles or organically?
Yeah, I think that teachers, we don't know how powerful we are in their life. And so I think personal testimony is like really a powerful tool. Like just saying, when I was a little kid, I used these words, and then I found this out about myself, and now I use different words. And I just wanted you to know that about me. And you know how you're doing SEL work with your kiddos, and you know that they have this skill, but they don't do it. And then later on, when they're regulated, you're like, hey, what happened there? And then they can tell you. They're like, I was mad and I flipped my lid and I was totally not in control of my body and I hurt someone. And you're like, yeah, dude. I think that gender is similar to that, where like we don't know how much they're internalizing just by exposure. They're not ready to perform for us. You know what I mean? But they're learning it and they're taking it in, and the possibility is there, which was not true for me. Like just giving them possibilities is the most important work that we can do, and modeling.
Oh, okay.
So this brings up a interesting perspective that I think that I have been sitting with, and please let me know if I cut out. My internet's been being really sketchy tonight, but where do we have the conversation around family preference, culture, beliefs in this, especially when we're working with other people's children, and not everybody in our community or society is at this level to have these discussions. And sometimes I see where families, and often I'm dealing with families that are upset. So families then become frustrated or upset that we're pushing an agenda on their child to start exploring their gender identity or their gender curiosity before a family's ready for that conversation to have. And I wonder what advice you give to educators in trying to create these classrooms that are very inclusive and open, and yet still thinking about the aspect that the work that we all are in is still a business, and the families are still our customers. And so I'm just wondering what is your advice to educators to find that balance in respecting the family's culture, belief, values, while they're still learning this as adults?
Yeah, that's the question, right? That is the one. Okay. So Darlene, I'm just gonna like tell you the truth. The way I do it is I reflect back to them their feeling. Like I hear you saying that this feels unsafe for you and your family. And I hear you saying that you're concerned, right? And then I would say the reason why I am committed to building this inclusive classroom is actually not for your child, but for the child who needs this mirror. And I'm like, but it doesn't mean that we don't want to uphold your values as well. And the way that I would punctuate it is by showing them the risks of when you don't have an inclusive family. So the Trevor Project and GLSEN do an annual survey for kids, and they're older though, because they're the only ones that can take the survey, you know, but from like middle school to high schoolers. And it shows you how urgent it is around suicidality. And so that's what I say. I'm like, I'm doing this to save lives, quite honestly.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I also often speak to educators, especially I work in higher education, so I work a lot with teaching educators to be educators. And there's also a huge influence that educators have on children because they see you as role models and as people that they look up to. And I have seen many, many children in my career who will select a gender identity based on someone who they care about or who they're seeing as a role model. And that sometimes in itself um, can be hard for them to separate the difference between what they're internalizing for themselves and what they believe in and what they want to believe in for someone that they care deeply for. And so our conversations are tricky, and they do have a huge lifelong impact. That I asked that question because this is big stuff here, and it does have long lasting effects on folks. And so keeping in mind that sometimes the conversation has to go deeper than just that surface level. And so we're doing a training tonight, and people are going to take away information, and it's not something that you just go into a room and be like, I'm going to change my classroom and this is how we're going to do it, because the impact is big.
Yeah, the impact is big. So I'm somebody that I came up to that a lot actually as a preschool and kindergarten teacher myself. And being somebody who is trans, it was such a vulnerable position for me because I think you can fill in the blank, but I'm like, you're trying to say that me telling my younger self that I existed is an agenda. So I needed to ground myself in like slogans, basically, like really short phrases that I could memorize so that I had something to say when I felt activated. And one of them was, I am committed to listening to all children's truths. What they tell me, I value. So those are the things that I would say. So like, basically what I'm reflecting to them is that like, what your child is saying to me, including like that they're cisgender, is like, I'm going to take that to my heart, you know, that's my job, is to listen to them. And I think just by saying that, they start thinking like, what is my child's truth and what is my truth, basically.
Yeah.
For them. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And that personal reflection. Thank you.
Yeah. That also helped me too, is like remembering. So like I said, like 1 in 20, right? So if you just think about Hilltop, like we're in every class, you know. I think I'm out there. That's what I think. There's me out there. And man, I have spent a lot of time in therapy. It'd be nice if I hadn't done that. Although therapy is great. I just do it for hygiene now. Okay, well, I want to be mindful of our time because it's late. I appreciate you so much.
And thank you so much for this fantastic workshop. We're starting to get some appreciations in the chat. Please feel free to leave your gratitudes for Finn there, and just any final comments of appreciation or reflections. I'm dropping in the chat here, last chance to sign in if you wanted STARS credit or a certificate tonight. Keep following Finn. He is brilliant, as you all learned tonight. And you're just such an incredible support for this community, Finn. Thank you again. You can follow him on Instagram at fin.menzies. You can book a coaching call with him as well on his Calendly. And if you would like to be part of this continuing conversation in this setting with our Institute, we actually have a sort of a part 2 on this conversation coming up in March with Talcott Broadhead on continuing to do this work, especially given the political climate. They're going to talk about how do you really support and protect kids, especially in a time of anti-trans legislation. So we really hope that you will join us for that conversation. And a couple months before that, we'll be with Julietta Skoog talking about positive discipline from an anti-bias lens as well. So on your way out, first of all, happy first night of Hanukkah for all of you who celebrate. We so appreciate you being here with us. And feel free to come off mute on your way out if you'd like to say goodbye or any gratitudes.
Becky, do we have everyone's email from here?
We do have everyone's email, and
Okay,
we can
great.
send out resources. And would you like to share your slides afterward then, or
Yeah.
some version? Okay.
We could, the ones that I sent you, that everyone can have those ones. And then I
Perfect.
want to add some steps to addressing concerns with parents.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Finn. Thank you, everyone.